I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. I always thought my marriage to Molly was rock solid. We had been together for 12 years, and I never once doubted her love or loyalty. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room just by walking into it, charming, smart, with a smile that made you forget your worries. But somewhere along the way, that light began to dim, and I didn't realize it until it was too late. It started subtly. At first, I barely noticed the changes, how she'd come home later than usual, or how her laughter seemed forced when we were together. I chalked it up to stress from work. Molly had a demanding job in marketing, and she'd often travel for business meetings and conferences. I told myself this was just a rough patch, that every marriage had them. But then there were the phone calls. The late-night texts. She'd be glued to her phone, and whenever I asked her who it was, she'd say it was work, or just one of her girlfriends. It didn't sit right with me, but I trusted her. Or maybe I just wanted to trust her. The truth is, I didn't want to be that paranoid husband who accused his wife of cheating without any proof. I think back now to all those little moments I ignored. The nights she claimed she was too tired to talk, the weekends where she seemed distracted, her eyes darting to her phone whenever it lit up. Maybe some part of me knew all along, but I wasn't ready to face it. Then came the weekend in question. We were on our way to a cabin in the mountains, a weekend getaway I had planned for us. Just the two of us, no distractions. I thought it might help us reconnect. Molly seemed excited enough when we left, though she kept checking her phone the entire drive. "We're supposed to be getting away from all this," I joked, nodding toward her phone. "Isn't that the point of a vacation?" She gave me a quick smile, slipping the phone into her bag. "You're right. No more work." But I could see she was still thinking about something, or maybe someone. That's when it first really hit me, maybe I wasn't the only one she had on her mind. We pulled into a gas station along the way, one of those places where you can grab a coffee and stretch your legs. Molly said she needed to use the bathroom and headed inside, leaving her phone on the seat. For a moment, I thought about picking it up, about looking. But I didn't want to be that guy, the one who didn't trust his wife, the one who snoops. So, I just sat there, scrolling through my own phone, telling myself that everything was fine. And then her phone lit up. I wasn't going to look at it. I swear I wasn't. But out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen, Nick. The message preview said, "Can't wait to see you tonight, babe." My heart stopped. There it was. Proof. Hard evidence. All the doubts, all the suspicions I had pushed aside, came crashing down on me in that one moment. I sat there, staring at the message, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it. Molly had told me she was just busy with work, that these trips were exhausting. She'd never mentioned Nick, at least not in a way that made me think twice. He was just a colleague, a business contact. Except now I knew that wasn't the whole story. She came sprinting out of the gas station like she was being chased, and the second she saw her phone in my hand, her face changed. It was the kind of panic you can't fake. She grabbed the phone, mumbled something about a work emergency, and went back inside without even looking at me. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I knew. I sat there, staring out the windshield, feeling the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. I could hear the cars rushing by on the highway, but it was all background noise. My world had shifted. The woman I had shared a life with for 12 years, the one I had trusted more than anyone, had been lying to me. The reality of it was like a punch to the gut, and I wasn't sure if I could catch my breath. When Molly finally came back, she acted like nothing had happened. She chatted about the trip, about what we'd do when we got to the cabin. It was like she was playing a role, pretending everything was fine, while I sat next to her, knowing that everything had changed. I stayed quiet the rest of the drive. I needed time to think, to figure out what to do. Confronting her then and there didn't feel right. Not yet. I wasn't ready for the fight. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses, her lies. But I wasn't going to let this slide. I was done being the clueless husband. That night, when we got to the cabin, I excused myself after dinner, saying I needed to check some emails for work. I sat down with my laptop, but instead of working, I started going through her phone records. I found exactly what I expected: messages, calls, all of them linked to Nick. It had been going on for months. They had met on one of her work trips, and the affair had started almost immediately after. By the time I went back inside, Molly was already asleep. She looked so peaceful, curled up under the blankets, her blonde hair spread out on the pillow. For a moment, I wondered how things had gone so wrong. How had we ended up here, with me snooping through her phone while she lied to my face? But then I remembered that message from Nick, the one that confirmed everything. She wasn't the woman I thought she was anymore. Maybe she never had been. As I lay there next to her, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her tonight. No, that would be too easy. Molly thought she had me fooled, that she could keep sneaking around and I'd be none the wiser. But she was wrong. I had a plan now. I wasn't just going to catch her in the act, I was going to make her regret every lie, every betrayal. I was going to take back everything she thought she had taken from me. And when I was done, she'd have nothing left. The next morning, Molly was her usual self, chatty, energetic, and a little too cheerful. I watched her move around the kitchen in the cabin, making coffee and humming to herself, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I was no longer in the dark, and it was only a matter of time before she realized it. We spent the day hiking through the mountains, taking in the fresh air and the views. It should have been relaxing. It should have been the kind of day where we reconnected, just the two of us away from the stress of our daily lives. But all I could think about was what I had seen on her phone. Every time she smiled at me, every time she reached for my hand, it felt like a lie. I kept wondering how long she had been smiling at Nick like that, how long she had been lying to me. By the time we got back to the cabin, the tension between us was thick, even though she didn't seem to notice it. Or maybe she was just pretending not to notice. She poured us both a glass of wine, acting like the perfect wife, but I wasn't fooled anymore. I wasn't angry, not yet. It was more of a cold realization settling in, the knowledge that this marriage was built on lies. That night, after she fell asleep, I got out of bed and went to the living room. I sat there in the dark, staring at my phone, going over everything I had learned. It wasn't just the texts. I had found emails, hotel bookings, receipts. She had been using our joint account to pay for their little trips. The fact that she had used our money for him made me sick to my stomach. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind was spinning, going over all the possibilities, all the ways this could end. I could confront her now. I could demand an explanation, make her feel guilty, make her cry. But what would that do? It wouldn't erase what she'd done, and it wouldn't give me back the years she had stolen from me. I needed something more. I needed her to feel the full weight of what she had done. The following week, we returned home, and I began putting my plan into action. The first step was gathering all the evidence I could. I wanted everything: texts, emails, photos, anything that showed the depth of her betrayal. I wasn't going to leave any stone unturned. If Molly thought she could get away with this, she was wrong. I also started making quiet moves behind the scenes. I had a lawyer friend, Rob, who I'd known since college. I hadn't told him much yet, just that I needed to set up a meeting to talk about personal matters. He was discreet, and I trusted him. He knew how to handle things like this. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, Molly wouldn't have a chance to fight back. In the meantime, I kept playing the part of the loving husband. I went to work, came home, made dinner, and smiled when I needed to. But underneath the surface, I was seething. Every time Molly kissed me, every time she told me she loved me, I felt my anger grow. She had no idea what was coming. The hardest part was pretending everything was fine while I waited for the right moment to strike. It was like living in a bad dream where nothing felt real. I'd wake up in the morning, go through the motions of our life together, but in the back of my mind, I was always thinking about Nick, about their affair, about how I was going to make them both pay. One night, after dinner, Molly casually mentioned she had a business trip coming up the following week. She said it like it was no big deal, like it was just another routine part of her job. But I knew better. I knew she was planning to meet Nick, and this time, I was ready. "That's great," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Where are you headed this time?" "Chicago," she replied, not missing a beat. "Just a quick conference. I'll be back in 2 days." "Sounds fun," I said, smiling. "Maybe I should tag along. We could make it a little getaway." For the briefest second, her face faltered. It was barely noticeable, just a flicker of something, panic, maybe, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, it's mostly work stuff," she said with a laugh. "You'd be bored out of your mind. Trust me, it's better if you stay home." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Yeah, you're probably right. I've got a lot going on at work anyway." She smiled, relieved that I had dropped the idea. But I hadn't. Not really. I had no intention of going with her, but now I knew for certain that this conference was just another excuse to see Nick. That night, after she went to bed, I sat in my office and called Rob. It was late, but he picked up after a couple of rings. "Hey, man. What's going on?" he asked, his voice groggy. "I need your help," I said. "It's about Molly." He was quiet for a moment, probably sensing the seriousness in my tone. "What's going on?" "She's cheating on me," I said, the words finally spoken out loud. Saying them felt like a weight being lifted, but it also made the reality of the situation hit harder. Rob sighed. "Shit, man. I'm sorry to hear that. What do you want to do?" "I want a divorce," I said, my voice firm. "But I don't want her to see it coming. I need to make sure she doesn't get a dime more than what she's entitled to." Rob was silent for a moment, probably thinking through the logistics. "Okay, we can make that happen. Do you have proof?" "I've got everything," I said, my voice cold. "Texts, emails, photos. I've been keeping track of everything." "Good," he replied. "That'll make things a lot easier. Let's set up a time to meet in person and go over everything. We'll make sure you're covered." We arranged to meet later that week, and I hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of relief. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back now. The next few days passed in a blur. Molly was getting ready for her conference, and I was preparing for the moment when I would drop the bombshell. I made sure everything was in order, the evidence, the financial records, the legal paperwork. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, she wouldn't have a leg to stand on. The night before she was supposed to leave, we had dinner together, just like we always did. She smiled, laughed, and told me stories about her day at work. But all I could think about was how this would be the last time we'd sit together like this. When we finished eating, I stood up and cleared the dishes, trying to keep my composure. I watched her out of the corner of my eye as she scrolled through her phone, probably texting Nick about their plans for the next few days. It took everything in me not to smash the phone right there, to scream at her, to demand answers. But I didn't. I waited. Because the satisfaction of watching her world crumble was going to be worth every second of patience. By the time Molly left for her trip the next morning, everything was in place. The trap was set, and all I had to do was wait for her to fall into it. The morning Molly left for her trip, I stood at the door, watching her drive away with that same fake smile she had perfected over the months. She waved, and I waved back, a perfect image of the husband she thought she had fooled. Inside, I was seething, counting down the moments until I could finally bring everything crashing down around her. I spent the next few hours in preparation mode. This was it. This was the day everything would change. Once she was gone, I went straight to my office and pulled out the folder where I had been collecting all the evidence. It was thick now, filled with printouts of texts, emails, receipts, even photos I had managed to pull from her cloud account. There was no doubt about what had been going on, no room for denial or excuses. I called Rob again, telling him I was ready. We arranged to meet at his office that afternoon to finalize everything. The divorce papers were ready, and the evidence was more than enough to ensure I came out of this clean, leaving Molly with as little as possible. As I sat at my desk, waiting for the time to leave, I went over the plan in my head, again and again. This wasn't just about catching her or confronting her. It was about control. She had been lying to me for months, maybe longer, making me think our marriage was still solid while she was sneaking off with Nick. She thought she had me wrapped around her finger, that I would never find out, never suspect a thing. But now, the tables had turned, and I was the one holding all the cards. At noon, I headed to Rob's office. I could feel the tension building inside me as I walked through the door, my hands tight around the folder I was carrying. I wasn't nervous, not exactly, but the anticipation was almost unbearable. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment where I would finally take back control of my life. Rob greeted me with a firm handshake and a look that told me he understood just how serious this was. We sat down in his office, the folder between us, and went over everything one last time. He was meticulous, pointing out where I had the upper hand, how we could ensure Molly walked away with nothing more than what she was legally entitled to. It wasn't much. She's going to fight it, Rob warned. Once she realizes what's happening, she's not going to go down easy. I'm counting on it, I said. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her betrayal, to understand just how much she had destroyed. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about making her pay for every lie, every deceitful smile, every moment she had spent with Nick while I had been sitting at home, trusting her. After we wrapped up the details, Rob handed me the final paperwork. The divorce papers, along with the restraining order I had requested to ensure she couldn't take anything from our accounts once she realized what was happening. Everything was ready. You'll need to have her served once she's back, Rob said. But we can make sure the timing is right. We don't want to give her any chance to prepare. I nodded, feeling the weight of the documents in my hand. It was almost surreal, holding the end of my marriage in a stack of neatly printed papers. But it was also liberating. Molly had taken so much from me already, and now, I was going to take back everything I could. I left Rob's office with a sense of finality. The wheels were in motion, and there was no turning back now. By this time tomorrow, Molly's life would look very different. On the drive home, I thought about Nick. The smug bastard probably thought he was going to get away with everything too, didn't he? He thought he could swoop in, charm my wife, and live happily ever after while I played the fool. Well, I had plans for him too. I wasn't just going after Molly. No, Nick was going to feel the consequences of his actions too. I had already sent a package to his wife, filled with all the same evidence I had gathered. By the time Molly got back from her little rendezvous, Nick's wife would have seen everything. I imagined the look on his face when he walked into his house and found out his world had collapsed. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I felt a cold, calm determination settle over me. This was what needed to happen. This was the only way to make sure neither of them ever forgot what they had done. I spent the rest of the day cleaning out the house. Not just physically, but emotionally. I took down every photo of Molly, packed up the little things that reminded me of her, and shoved them into boxes in the garage. I didn't need to see her face everywhere. I didn't need the constant reminders of the life we had built, no, the life I had built, while she had been busy tearing it down behind my back. It wasn't until late that evening, when I was sitting on the couch with a beer in my hand, that I finally allowed myself to think about what was going to happen when Molly walked through the door and realized what I had done. I imagined the shock on her face, the tears, the panic. She'd probably try to deny it at first, claim it wasn't what it looked like, that I had misunderstood. But I had everything. Every receipt, every message, every lie she had told. There was no misunderstanding here. I wondered if she'd try to run to Nick for comfort. Would he even be there, or would his wife have thrown him out by then? I almost laughed at the thought of them both standing outside, homeless and betrayed, the perfect picture of karma. It was almost too perfect. The next morning, I woke up early. I had a few more things to take care of before Molly came home, a few more loose ends to tie up. I checked the bank accounts again, just to make sure she hadn't touched anything. I double-checked the emails I had forwarded to Nick's wife, making sure everything had gone through. Then, I waited. Molly's flight wasn't due to land until late afternoon, and I knew she'd come home tired, expecting to find everything just as she had left it. She'd probably walk in, drop her bags by the door, and greet me with that same fake smile she had been using for months. But today, it would be different. Today, she wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. I sat in the living room, staring out the window, my hands steady as I thought about the moment she'd walk through the door. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at it, another message from Rob, just confirming the timing. Everything was in place. The lawyer was ready to send the papers, the bank accounts were secure, and the evidence was waiting in a neat little folder on the kitchen table. By the time the sun started to set, I heard her car pull into the driveway. My heart didn't race, my breath didn't quicken. I was ready for this. She thought she could walk in like nothing had changed, but by the time she left, she'd know she had made the biggest mistake of her life. The front door opened, and there she was. Tired, disheveled from her trip, but still trying to flash that same charming smile. "Hey," she said, walking in and setting her bag down. "I'm home." "Good," I said, standing up slowly. "We need to talk." Molly froze, her hand still on her bag, and for the first time, I saw the realization flicker across her face. She knew something was wrong. "Mark, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I pointed to the folder on the kitchen table. "I think you know exactly what's going on." She turned, her eyes widening as she spotted the folder, the papers inside peeking out just enough to show her that I had seen everything. And just like that, the carefully crafted life she had built with Nick began to unravel. Molly stood frozen, her eyes darting between me and the folder on the table. I watched as her face drained of color, her usually confident smile slipping into something else, fear, maybe. Or realization. Either way, she knew her lies were finally catching up with her. She took a tentative step toward the table, her fingers trembling as she reached for the folder. I didn't stop her. I wanted her to see it, to feel the weight of every piece of evidence I had collected. The texts, the emails, the hotel bookings, her affair laid bare in black and white. I waited, watching her read through the first few pages, her expression tightening with every line. "Mark," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can explain." "Don't," I cut her off, my voice cold and steady. "Don't insult me by pretending there's an explanation. You cheated, Molly. You lied. And now you're going to face the consequences." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not anymore. I had spent months watching her live a double life, thinking she had me fooled, but I wasn't the fool anymore. I was the one in control now. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said, her voice cracking as she tried to hold back the tears. "I love you, Mark. I do. I was lost. I didn't know how to stop." "You didn't want to stop," I said flatly. "You had plenty of chances, but you kept going. With him." She flinched at the mention of Nick. "Good. Let her feel the sting of her betrayal. Let her feel everything she had put me through. I ended it, she whispered, her tears falling freely now. I told him it was over. Please, Mark, I made a mistake, but I want to fix this. I want to make things right. I stared at her, trying to see any hint of sincerity in her words, but all I saw was a woman trying to salvage what little she had left. She was scrambling, desperate to keep everything from slipping away. And part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to think that maybe she could change, that maybe we could fix what had been broken. But then I remembered Nick, and all the lies she had told, and that sliver of hope disappeared. It's too late, I said quietly. We're done, Molly. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll get what you're legally entitled to, nothing more. Her face crumpled, and she sank into the chair, her head in her hands. For the first time, I saw her truly break, the weight of her actions crashing down on her. But instead of satisfaction, I felt hollow. Watching her fall apart didn't bring me the peace I thought it would. It didn't erase the months of hurt or betrayal. It just made everything feel emptier. I stood there, unsure of what to do next. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways, her begging for forgiveness, me walking away triumphant. But now, standing in the middle of our kitchen with her sobbing at the table, none of it felt right. None of it felt like the ending I wanted. Please, Mark, she whispered again, her voice hoarse. Don't leave me. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can. Stop, I said, turning away from her. I couldn't listen to her anymore. I couldn't stand the sound of her voice, pleading for something she didn't deserve. It's over, Molly. I'm done. I walked toward the door, ready to leave, ready to put this entire chapter of my life behind me. But as I reached for the handle, I heard a sound behind me, a soft thud, followed by a choked gasp. I turned, expecting to see Molly still at the table, but she wasn't there. She was on the floor, crumpled in a heap, clutching her chest. Panic surged through me as I rushed toward her, dropping to my knees beside her. Molly! I shouted, shaking her lightly. Molly, what's wrong? She couldn't speak. Her eyes were wide, her breathing shallow, and her face had gone ghostly pale. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands. My wife, she's collapsed, I said, my voice shaking as I gave them our address. She's not breathing right. I think she's having a heart attack. Please, send someone, now. The seconds dragged by like hours as I knelt there, helpless, watching the woman I had spent 12 years of my life with fighting for breath. All the anger, all the betrayal, vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, gut-wrenching fear. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. I didn't want her to die. Not like this. Not now. Molly, stay with me, I whispered, grabbing her hand. Just hold on. Help's coming. Just stay with me. Her eyes flickered, her lips moving as if she was trying to say something, but no sound came out. I squeezed her hand tighter, willing her to hold on, willing her not to leave me, even though I had just told her I was leaving her. The paramedics arrived minutes later, but it felt like a lifetime. They rushed in, taking over, doing everything they could to stabilize her. I watched, numb, as they worked, their voices a blur as they loaded her onto a stretcher and wheeled her out to the ambulance. I followed them to the hospital, my heart pounding, my mind racing. How had this happened? How had everything spiraled so far out of control? 1 minute, I was ready to walk away from her forever, and the next, I was praying she wouldn't die. Hours passed in a haze as I sat in the waiting room, my head in my hands. I kept replaying the scene over and over in my mind, the confrontation, her collapse, the way she had looked at me with those pleading eyes. It was all so wrong. I had wanted revenge. I had wanted her to feel the pain she had caused me. But now, all I wanted was for her to be okay. Finally, a doctor appeared, his face solemn. My stomach twisted as I stood up, bracing myself for the worst. "She had a heart attack," he said, his voice calm but heavy. "We did everything we could, but... I'm sorry. She didn't make it." The words hit me like a sledgehammer, knocking the breath from my lungs. I staggered back, the room spinning around me. She didn't make it. Molly was gone. Just like that, in the span of a few hours, my entire world had crumbled. I had spent months planning my revenge, preparing to leave her in ruins, but in the end, it didn't matter. There was no victory, no triumph. Only loss. Only the cold, hollow reality that the woman I had loved, despite everything, was gone. As I stood there, numb and broken, I realized that the revenge I had so carefully planned had cost me everything. It hadn't brought me peace. It hadn't healed the wounds. It had only led me here, to this empty hospital hallway, alone. And now, there was no going back.